Good morning, NorCal Carters. Today we have, unfortunately, it's a special episode, but this episode it really got brought to the attention, my attention, because we lost a racer over the past weekend. His name, Chris Worthington, and I don't have all the details. All I know is he took his own life, and it's one of those things where I didn't personally know him, but I had interacted with him on Facebook. And again, it's one of these shows. I have a podcast. I have friends that are in mental health, and so with that, my friend Vicky is going to join us. And Vicky, say hello.
Hi, everyone.
So my friend Vicky, she has a practice out of Sonoma. And again, this is not one of those warm, fuzzy feeling shows. It really just got prompted after I heard the news of Chris, and I thought it was important that we get some information out there. I mean, I wouldn't know who to call. I wouldn't know where to look as far as resources. If you're a friend of somebody, how to identify it? How do you step in? How do you help? Can you step in? And hopefully this show will help answer some of those questions. So Vicky, thank you again for taking the time. So why don't you give the listeners a background on yourself?
Sure. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and currently I work in private practice in Sonoma with a colleague. Our practice is called Sonoma Valley Family Therapy, and we provide mental health services to, teens, adults, families, couples. But previously, I had worked for Sonoma County Mental Health for a crisis response team. So we worked a lot in the high schools, the public high schools there, but also a couple of the local colleges and agencies for people who were struggling with depression and thoughts of suicide. And we, would go and do a lot of crisis assessments, sometimes, and connecting people to resources, whether it meant they needed to go to the hospital or see a therapist, get a psychiatrist. And we also did a lot of suicide prevention trainings for the schools to teach people what to look out for, how to intervene, what to do. So it's definitely something I feel pretty passionately about, getting this information out there, because the more comfortable we are talking about this difficult stuff, the more we can help people who are struggling, that they don't feel like they have to keep it to themselves. So I'm happy to try to offer some of what I know here today.
Yeah, and thank you again for joining us. And without going too much into your own personal life, I mean, you've directly experienced substance abuse and things along those lines. And so when I heard, the news of Chris, you were the first person I kind of thought about. It's like, okay, well, who do I know that has experience with, this type of a crisis? So again, I thank you for coming on. And for those that are watching on YouTube or on one of the videos, in the description, I will put all of Vicky's contact information. So if you feel like you need to get a hold of her, she's also sent me over some resources. So I will put those on probably Google Drive and share the links so people can print those out as well. And again, I really don't know how this format is going to go. It's not my normal weekly podcast of race events, etc., and it's a very sensitive topic. So from your experience, is this? I honestly, I can't even get myself, mentally in the right place, probably to ask the right questions. So I'll need your guidance, and your expertise on that side of it. But when you're dealing with people and it's a crisis center, was it typically they would call in? Is there an app? Is there a website? How can people, reach out to a center?
Mm-hmm. Well, and just to clarify kind of your earlier comment, I think what you were meaning to say is I've had people in my personal life that struggled with depression, with thoughts of suicide, with addiction. So while I have that professional experience, I also have like the personal experience. And, you know, it's always interesting. Like you can know all of the things, but when it's in your life, it's very different handling it. So I have a lot of empathy for how difficult and stressful that can be. Yes, so the program I worked for was kind of unique in the sense that we were administrative staff or counselors from a lot of the high schools or the agencies. They would call us. We had a crisis phone, and then we would do kind of an assessment over the phone of the situation to see if, you know, it warranted, we need to send somebody out right now to deal with the crisis, or can it wait until one of our staff was at their like regularly scheduled time at the school or the agency to deal with it. Typically, there are, in the communities that there are different resources to do this, like, because not every county has a program that's going to bring somebody to you. I think conversations are happening where that might start to change, but anyone in a crisis can call or go to their emergency room. You know, there are people there that know how to deal with this stuff. In Sonoma County, in Napa, in Marin, those are the ones I'm most familiar with. They have specific like emergency crisis centers for mental health. So those are places that are open all the time where you can just show up or you can call, whether it's you or somebody you care about, and talk to somebody, and they might tell you to come in or bring that person in. There are also hotline numbers, which I've given you, that people can call any time of day. There's a text line for that. There are online chats. So kind of whatever people are most comfortable communicating, like there's a resource for that. Yeah, I mean, maybe it would be helpful to start with the kind of signs, like the things to look for that indicate that there's something going on. That might be a good place to start.
Okay, can we do it? Can we split it up where it's as a person themselves, how to identify it? And then as a family, a friend, or a close member of that person, is that a possible thing to do? Where, let's say for me, example, if I'm struggling with something, it's like, okay, how would I identify it, and then how do I go about the process of reaching out?
Well, I think the biggest thing for an individual is to notice how what they're experiencing is starting to have a negative impact on their life, right? You know, because obviously there's varying degrees of depression, anxiety, the different things people struggle with. But once the symptoms of, say, depression get so significant where it's really hard to get out of bed, you know, the things that you used to care about just don't have an appeal anymore. The fact that most of the day you're just feeling really down, or you're feeling super irritable, or there's this kind of preoccupation with death that's happening, that's just kind of taking over, and it's impacting your ability to normally function in your life. Like that's when we start to know, okay, something is happening here that needs to be addressed. And it's hard for people to reach out for help. You know, I think there's this thing with depression where people feel like they're a burden to others, or they don't want, or maybe they don't deserve help, you know, that other people have it worse for them, so they should just figure out how to get over it. But the reality is that your experience matters. You know, it doesn't matter if this person has more trauma than you. Like, we can't even compare that stuff. It's how it's affected you, how you feel. That's important. We are all humans, and we deserve, you know, support. We deserve love. We deserve care, whatever that looks like. And so I always try to encourage people and build people up in that way. Like, you deserve that help. Even if you don't feel that way, like, I will tell you that. So finding one of those places where you feel comfortable reaching out, and oftentimes that tends to be like a family member or a friend that you're going to tell first. Which I guess can segue into being that family member or friend. You know, what can you look out for to indicate maybe something's going on with this person, so I should check in on them, and then how to support them, right?
Okay. Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And it would now, as far as the actual, again, we're as the person experiencing certain thoughts, at what point should that person be worried that, okay, this is no longer healthy for me to, is it a single thought that crosses your head, or is it something, is there some sort of a parameter that you look for as a professional, or questions that you ask them to kind of qualify them? It's like, no, this person is in an imminent danger, or, this person just had a bad Friday night. I mean, it's.
Yeah, good question. If I'm working with somebody, then we're having conversations around, okay, what are these thoughts that you're having around suicide or death? What do they sound like? Are there any specific plans that you're thinking about? And then what's the intent? Is it something you feel like you need to do right now? Or is it just this pervasive feeling of like, I'm really not happy and it would be easier if I weren't here anymore? So there's kind of like how specific these thoughts get and how intense it becomes. Like, if somebody's telling me, I don't want to live, I have plans to go, well, take these pills when I get home, like action needs to happen now. I can't let that person go home.
Yeah.
Right. But having some more of these vague thoughts about, just feeling really hopeless and that things are pointless and this just is hard. And I wish, I could go to sleep tomorrow and not wake up. That's not as imminent of like, we need to take action and go to the hospital, but it's still significant. And I think for people, the more frequent they're having these thoughts is an indicator, okay, I think I need some extra help. Having it happen one time, it can still be scary. So it's also really about the person's experience of having these kinds of thoughts. Like, okay, is this something I want to make sure I never have to think about again? So I'm going to try to get help. Or just, okay, that's something new. I think I can handle it. It's all, it's hard to generalize this stuff, but
Yeah, that may, I can completely, yeah, because everybody's different.
yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me into the next question. Is like, if you're, a close family member and you're suspecting someone, is just in a bad state of mind right now, what are some ways you can approach that individual that are, me pretty well. I mean, my filter doesn't work most of the time, if at all, ever. But what are some, ways you can approach somebody without, making it even worse? It's, I'm around a lot of, guys, the racing, etc. Hi, Theo. And it's, a lot of us are just very blunt with each other. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of us think of each other as family. Again, that's what prompted this podcast is, the news spread across karting, and it was is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so again, as a close friend to someone that you're suspecting you don't know, how can you approach someone like that?
Yeah, good question. And I think just to kind of preempt that, some of the biggest things to look for are a change in behavior, right? So we know our friends and family pretty well. So if we're observing them acting or talking differently, and there's something about it that feels not right, like this isn't normally how this person is, or like they used to be so full of energy and now they seem like they're really dragging, or they barely show up for events, that change in behavior, and then the hopelessness piece, I think, are some of the biggest indicators that these thoughts might be happening. And I've given you a list of a lot of the signs, you know, and they can be, yeah, people can't read that.
No, they can't. But I will post a link online.
And they can be pretty direct. Like some people will say like, why, well, you know, I might just go kill myself this weekend. And you're kind of like, why, who would say that, you know? But sometimes people are kind of putting it out there to see what people will do. And then other times it's subtle. It's just like, okay, well, I don't know if I'm really gonna, you might not see me here again. And so sometimes it's this verbal things that people say, or that they're, you know, the way they talk about stuff, it seems really morose or down or negative. And then sometimes it's the behavioral stuff that you'll notice, right? That, you know, we had a kid once that was like wanting to go to his grandpa's cabin, and it was very strange for him to be wanting to go there at that time of year, and he kept asking his dad, you know, to go there. And then come to find out, it was because he knew there was a gun at that cabin and he wanted to use it. So and it didn't happen, you know, he got an intervention and was okay. But things like that, where there's just something about it that's not right. It's not normal. And then also having really difficult stuff in your life. You know, none of these things alone, like, you know, you lose somebody important to you, you lose a job, you know, have to move. Like transitional stuff can be really hard. And it doesn't mean someone's going to think about suicide, but it means their risk increases to that being on their mind. And the more kind of difficult things happening, the more likely that people can go there. So if you are noticing any of these things with a friend, honestly, the best way, in my opinion, is to like directly ask, like, hey, you know, I've noticed that you haven't really been around a lot, and when you are, you're not as engaged. I'm wondering if, you know, something's been going on with you, if you're feeling kind of depressed or having any thoughts about ending your life. Like the more open you can be to like asking these questions, it's giving that person permission to do that too. Okay. And I think the important part is to try to withhold judgment. You know, like it's easy to say something because we're uncomfortable. You know, you're not thinking about doing anything stupid, are you? But that makes the person feel like, well, now if I say yes, you're going to think I'm stupid, you know? Yeah.
Now, is this something that where when someone is in that state of mind, it's everything compounds, where you're already, I don't know, I'll think of a couple examples. You know, you lose your job. I mean, honestly, I think COVID has affected people quite mentally. I think social media is definitely got people. I mean, again, you know me pretty well. My social media stuff is, if you take my stuff seriously, I apologize, but don't take my page seriously, because I'm kind of the instigator, if you will. You know, I kind of want people to think and get their minds going, but it's like also I do kind of like to push buttons. So is there something where you lose your job, you sign into social media, and you know everything's doom and gloom? Do a lot of people get to this place and then just you're washing your dishes and you break it, and it just like that's just the end of the world? Like not figuratively, that's a bad choice of words, but it's like that was just like you just broke a dish, who cares? But it just everything compounds, and all these little things just seem to be worse and worse and worse. I mean, can people get to that point?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's part of the struggle with life, is like if things start to pile on top of each other, it's hard, you know? Like, yeah. Because now, yes, COVID, we're all living through this collective period of trauma, and then people we know maybe have died, whether it's because of COVID or other reasons. You know, maybe we've lost our job or a family member has. We're worried about keeping our house. Like, all of those things are a lot to cope with, like, by themselves. And then all at once is, it can strain anybody, you know?
Yeah.
And I think what happens is when people fall into like pretty deep depression and thoughts of suicide is that like their vision starts to narrow and they don't see any really solutions to their problems other than suicide. It's like, okay, I've tried everything else. I can't keep going on this way. This is the way out, you know? And there's this, it's really hard for the family or the people on the other side to not feel like it's a selfish thing, but that person is typically so consumed by kind of how hard and depressed or miserable or stressful, like they're so consumed by their experience that they can't even think about other people at that point. It's taking all of their energy just to get out of bed, you know?
Yeah. No, and that's a great way to go into the next part. I'm going to avoid how I asked this question, but for the friends and family that are left, how do they cope? What are some things they can do? Because whether they have a sense of guilt, whether, oh, I should have done something, or this, one, could they have done something? And then two, how can they work through their own thoughts of guilt? If they're, you know, if they have a member of their social network that has done something like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy thing, and obviously the situations are very different depending on what happened, why it happened, what that person was going through. But the experience of grief after a suicide, there's a lot of commonalities there, that you replay everything that happened, the what ifs. And I think a disclaimer to say is like, you can't be responsible for what you didn't know. And hopefully by having this conversation, we are giving people more information so that they know more about what to look out for and what to do in those situations. But it's so common for guilt to come up because now you're playing back everything that happened, and you can be like, oh, actually there were signs there.
Yeah.
And I would say, you know, the statistics show that like 80 to 90% of people show some kind of warning signs before taking action. So those are the verbal ones, the actions, the behaviors, the situational things they're going through. But then there is that 10 to 20% that show no signs, you know, so there wasn't a way for people to know. And I think, and the reality too is the people closest to that person who died by suicide are at higher risk for suicide themselves after that happens. So we really want to make sure that they have the support after something like this happens. And it's, with grief, it helps to be able to grieve with other people who knew that person. There's something really special about that shared experience, and it feels a little bit less lonely. So, you know, that's why these rituals we have, you know, continue, you know, these memorials, celebrations of life, or in different cultures, you know, they might grieve for a week together. So all, like, being able to do that helps the healing process. And I think it's also just getting to the basics in that, like, the quick aftermath of something like this, of like making sure you're getting enough sleep, that you're eating healthy, that you're staying hydrated, that you are being active in some way, and just taking really good care of yourself, because grief is hard. And unfortunately, there's no quick way through it. Like, you have to feel it, you know, you can't go around it. And it's never gone, but your relationship with it changes, and you learn how to live with it. You learn how to live with that person being gone. Yeah.
And you had mentioned like memorials and things and getting around people. I know a lot of churches also offer like grief share. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're more of the type of person that's more spiritually grounded or based in, but you feel like, okay, well, I don't really have anywhere to go. I know a lot of churches do offer sometimes even weekly meetings
Mm-hmm.
where they have a weekly grief share meeting. And again, I will post the resources that you sent over. And then if you're listening or watching, and you have a resource that you would like to share, put it in the comments. However you're coming across this video or podcast, just put it in the comments like, oh, whether it was yourself that you used a service, etc. Yeah, just post it below, because my hope, that this podcast isn't just NorCal Carters, is that it goes across the country. Again, with Chris, he was across the country, but the news spread very quickly. And again, it's sad. And again, I appreciate you taking the time, because it's, I mean, I guess with Google and everything, is like people say, you and I have had some great conversations in the past. And you've said to me, years ago, well, if you didn't know you had access to a resource, then you're kind of underprivileged. And you and I, we're not going to get into politics on this one. But I've always thought about that comment you made. And my attitude was more brash, like, well, there's Google. Well, if you don't know there's Google, then you don't know to look for Google, right? And so with this situation, if you don't know where to look,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like, it's just a black hole, if you will. So I will post, we have a resource sheet, so I will post the link to that. And then again, if you're listening, put in the comments if you know of resources. And
Well, yeah, and I think with that, when people are in this headspace, they're not necessarily having like the clarity of mind to be like, oh, I need to go look into like therapists, because, or places I can call. It's not that easy when you feel overwhelmed by everything in life. You can feel pretty immobilized. And then maybe you do try to call a therapist, and as of right now, a lot of people are full. So then you feel like, oh, well, that's just a sign I don't deserve help. So for me, like, I definitely try to do what I can to make sure people have the support they need, that they can find a therapist with openings. And I didn't put this on the resource sheet, but there are a lot of grief services too, typically through hospice. But they offer free grief counseling for people, and it's just really helpful to have that place to go after something like this, because there always comes to a point where people in your life start to think like, oh, well, you should be past this by now, but like, it's never that easy,
Yeah. So you said hospice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I never would have thought of hospice.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you said that, I was like, yeah, that actually does make a lot of sense. But
or through like some of the hospitals, like here in Sonoma County, there's a couple, I think Sutter is one of them. They have, free grief counseling through them as well. So
okay. And then again, the resource sheet you sent over, I will post this, because on the top you have a lot of Napa, Sonoma, etc. But then you also have national resources with a crisis text line, websites, etc. So I will get those online as well. And but yeah, it was a comment you made years ago about, if you don't know about a resource, you don't know to look for the resource.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty powerful. And yeah. So, and again, I'm glad you were able to come on today, because again, this is a resource. It's unfortunately, this podcast was never on my planned show.
Yeah.
And it just the unfortunate events, like, okay, I think it just prompted me. It's like we need to get something out there. It's it is important, and it's one of the, you don't think about it until something happens, right?
Yeah.
It's like if there's a natural disaster, it's like, how much water do you have in your house right now? Like sitting on the shelf, do you have 30, 40 gallons? And most people are probably going to go, oh no, because I just go to the faucet, right? It's always right there. And then when something happens and there's this, like, oh, well, now what?
Yeah. Well, and I do appreciate you reaching out and wanting to have this conversation because, it's not something that people talk about enough, but it's very common. People who struggle with mental health challenges and thoughts of suicide, like, I guarantee you it happens to more people than we even realize. So the more we can kind of make ourselves open to this, that people won't feel like they have to hide it or that they're a burden, that we can tell people it's okay to talk to your friends about this, because if they're a really good friend, they're going to care that you're struggling. You're not a burden.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, okay, but now, not to be too Jason Barry-ish, but what if you don't have any friends? What if you feel like you're just out there all by yourself and I don't have anybody to talk to.
Yeah.
Whether in reality you do or don't, you're in that space. Like there is nobody out there that I can share this with. If someone's in that space, what do they do?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a common feeling once people get to a certain point. But there are all of these resources. So like the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, the crisis text line, these crisis chats, like those are things you can use. There will be somebody who answers when you call that you can talk to. You can get set up with a therapist. You can find a group. There are things that we could connect that person to so that they don't feel so alone, because that often will make a huge difference.
Okay. And then, so let's take a moment. Walk us through the typical, again, we're generalizing, and you said earlier it's very hard to do, but let's go from, someone decides, okay, I'm gonna do something now, but let's say they use the crisis text line or they call one of the numbers. What is that process that a counselor will go through? And then before they hang up, how do they direct that person on the other line to take the next steps towards healing? What does that look like?
So I haven't worked for like a suicide hotline, but kind of how I imagine it works is, they talk to the person about what's going on. They're listening, they're validating, they're getting a sense for what they're thinking and feeling, and being that, supportive ear. I think they've probably gotten the person's location, kind of contact information. I think they might even require people to give that before they even talk to them. And then depending on the severity, if that person's like, I'm holding a bottle of pills in my hand, they might send the police to their house right then. If it's just, I'm having a really hard night and needed someone to talk to and feeling really sad, they will talk to them, and then they'll say, okay, let's connect you to some services. Do you have a therapist? Okay, no, like, let's try to find you someone in your area. And they're not going to leave them, empty-handed of just like, okay, we end this call and there's nothing for you to do afterwards. Like, they're definitely trying to make sure that person has information, resources, support to move forward with.
Okay. Do they also offer follow-up afterwards?
In terms of like calling them again?
Yeah, like a welfare check, the next day or a week later. Is that in place, or do they just make it the best effort they can to put them in? I don't want to say into the system, but that's the words that came out of my mouth. To make sure that they, that person is getting the right help.
I don't know if suicide hotlines do it that way. I know the program I worked for, we definitely followed up. So whoever was assigned to that site the next week would check in on them and make sure that they were doing okay and see if they'd got connected to anybody, And something that's happening a lot now is a lot of cities are starting to create mobile crisis teams.
Okay.
And so I think that would definitely be a part of it, because, people in a crisis, sometimes it's hard to take action, but that follow through is definitely important. And I think for family and friends, that's good to know. Like, you have a conversation with somebody who tells you they're struggling. It's okay to then check in with them later and just be like, hey, I've been thinking about you since our conversation. How are you doing? Did you get connected to a therapist or, this services or support group yet? Like, it's okay. Like, talking about it doesn't put that idea in someone's head or make it worse for them. It's showing them that you care.
Yeah.
You're important.
So since you haven't actually worked the actual hotline, so your experience was just a lot more hands-on, face to face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I definitely think is the way to do it. But and I think these hotlines are good to fill in a need when, if these kinds of services are at off hours or it's not that easy to get to somebody, that they're in those moments where maybe their therapist isn't available or whatever. So I think if we have all of these type of like different services that are complementary in place, then you can find the right mix of like making sure people get the support when they need it. And obviously that hands-on one is my preference.
Yeah. Now, let's say you're, someone is like, oh, I need help, but they don't want to go to a hospital. There's a lot of stigma for a lot of people. Me personally, there's just a lot of stigma around a hospital. It just, only sick people go there. It's like, oh, I'm not sick, except like whatever it is about a hospital. I'm a germaphobe, so I just only sick people go to hospitals. Is it like police stations, firehouses? Can someone go to a place like that and kind of say, hey, I need some help, and this is what I'm dealing with right now? And are you aware of like, will those different departments then bring the appropriate people in?
I think that they probably would. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily like, obviously getting someone help and support is what needs to happen when they need it. I wouldn't say that that's what I would recommend, because those, police and firehouses, like, they're not really set up for dealing with a mental health crisis in that way. And you're right, there is a big stigma about this, and like, what are people gonna think about me, or like, what happens, if I do get hospitalized, could that affect my career, the things that I'm doing? And these are all valid, important concerns, but I think at the end of the day, like, keeping that person safe to get through this crisis, because typically it's a window of time where this is like imminent, right? That when people get through that with the right help, that they don't continue to think this way. So I've had to do it in my job where it's like someone doesn't want help. They don't want to go to the hospital, but they're, have these imminent plans to end their life. So we're going to get them that help. And so sometimes it's hard to be that person to say, I hear what you're saying, but like, I think you deserve this help. Like, I'm not going to let you just end your life. If I have this information that you're planning to do this, like, I care about you enough to do this for you, even when you think you don't deserve it, and maybe some of these crisis centers, like, obviously there's hit or miss on experiences with those, but that's what they're designed to do. That's what people specialize there. And it's a bit of a different environment than just a regular hospital. But you have to go to what's available in your community. I think these mobile crisis teams are good because they can come to you. So the more we do that, the easier it is, where you can just call for the mobile support team and say, like, this is what's happening. I need someone to come talk to my friend or my husband or whatever. And that the more accessible we can make this, the more we can get people help where there's not all these barriers.
You just gave me a great place to end this podcast. And I'll give you a moment to think about it, because I'm terrible as an interviewer. So I didn't give you like any real outline ahead of time. But as you were talking, I think a great place, take a moment to think about, and I know you have to be very careful how you say it because of privacy issues, but if you can just give us an example and recall a time where you have helped someone walk through these steps and they have recovered, and after the fact they were in a much better mental place. Do you have a particular story you can vaguely share with us that gives people that hope? It's like, yeah, there is hope after this. They become in a much better place. Their life improves dramatically. Is that something you could share with us?
Yeah.
And I'll give you a moment to figure out how you want to word it, again, for the privacy reasons.
Yeah, there's one. In my last job, it was harder to be, like, I wasn't part of the whole journey necessarily. Like, I kind of was like that gateway person that got people help in the times of crisis. So I didn't always see them later when things were better. But it was such a gift when I was able to get that. And I think, there was a student who I helped kind of intervene with in terms of, they were thinking about suicide, feeling really alone and hopeless, and we're able to get that person connected to care and services, and then ran into them later, I think like the next school year, and they were just talking about like how appreciative they were that I had been able to help them get support, and that it was the right support that they needed, and that they were feeling so much better. And, we're grateful to have had someone to talk to during that time when things felt so overwhelming. And we're kind of ready to go on to bigger and better things after high school. And so, yeah, I mean, those moments were they happen more now because I'm in private practice and I'm a part of people's journey through this, but it's not why we do it, but it's always great to know like that it does make a difference, that you telling someone you care and that they deserve help can have a profound impact on their life.
I think that's, I want you to stay on with me, but I want to hit the end button, but stop the recording here. But I think that's a great place to stop. Vicky, thank you for taking the time. And again, to those that are listening, I will post links to the resources. I will post Vicky's contact information. And thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me.